Hello and welcome to Enchantment of Eternity's video on ranking all of Christopher Nolan's films. In this video I will rank the 12 films that Christopher Nolan directed from my personal least favorite to my favorite. So this is a patron requested video requested by patron Ricky. Thank you, Ricky, for your support. So, one thing, of course, I want to make very clear is that this is just my opinion. These are my rankings, personal rankings, and I don't claim that it represents anything else other than just my personal opinion. I have always been a really strong Christopher Nolan fan. I consider him one of my favorite directors of all time, and I make a point of seeing every movie that he does. That being said, I think I do need to give a bit of a disclaimer, just because I know it's going to be an unpopular opinion. In fact, this is a video I've been thinking about making for several years, and I think I've mentioned it on my channel before, which is where Ricky got the idea for and requested it, particularly with the release of Oppenheimer, which just came out. But one of the reasons why I was very hesitant to make this video is because I knew my opinion. I have a very unpopular opinion regarding Christopher Nolan's filmography, and specifically having to do with the Dark Knight trilogy, which I actually don't care for very much. In fact, the one movie out of that trilogy that most people would consider his masterpiece, most people would put it on number one on Christopher Nolan's list, is actually my least favorite of the trilogy. And so I knew I was going to have a lot of pushback. In fact, a lot of people who badmouth this movie or the Dark Knight trilogy, at least, around 5 or 6 years ago, were receiving death threats. So people were really sensitive about this. So that's why I was sort of hesitant to put out my personal ranking for Christopher Nolan's films, because most people who are fans of the Dark Knight trilogy, I am not. In fact, I'm gonna sound a bit like a hipster here, and I assure you I am not one, but I was really into Christopher Nolan before the Dark Knight trilogy, and I wish that he never did it. I think his time would have been well better spent not doing comic book movies. Yeah, I know people are hating me right now, but I just wanted to give you that warning so you weren't you weren't blindsided when I start doing my rankings and I have that trilogy and your everyone's personal favorite actually quite low on my list. So I did want to give that disclaimer, that sort of warning. But yeah, other than that, these are my personal favorite films for Christopher Nolan. So let me start with my number 12 and thus least favorite Christopher Nolan film. Don't worry, I'm not going to get to the Dark Knight trilogy yet, so it's not that bad, but I am going to start with number 12, which is Insomnia. I've seen recent reviews and videos about how this is an underrated movie that a lot of people sleep on. Sleep on because it's Insomnia now. But I actually very strongly disagree with that. Now, granted, I don't think I've seen this movie since it first came out, so it's not something I remember very well. In fact, I don't have a very clear memory of how it ends, although I do vaguely recall how it ends, generally speaking. But I never desired to see it again after it came out because I thought it was a very average movie. And especially, I believe this was the second Christopher Nolan film I ever saw. I believe it's the third one ever made. And so, but looking back on it now after his future films, films he made after this, it does stand out as being very kind of out of place and very straightforward, even from his very first film, which most people would put at number 12. It's seems more straightforward. Christopher Nolan films will usually have, like, they play with linear time, or they have a twist, or there's a deeper meaning, or something very deeper having to, say. And I feel like there's none of that here. Now, I don't think this movie completely sucks because it's got a great performance by Robin Williams that can't be understated. He does an amazing job, and Al Pacino does a pretty good job as well. However, I think those performances are kind of wasted on the script. Like, I was expecting more of it, especially from the trailers and how great Robin Williams was being. I was like, wow. And based off of course, the previous film of his that I saw, which I absolutely loved, I thought, wow, this is going to have a really, like, mind-bending, mind-provoking, thought-provoking, great ending. And it kind of doesn't, I don't think. I feel like these performances are kind of just wasted on a script that's just way too simple and straightforward. And yeah, there is some emotional impact of the ending, but I don't know. It's just, to me, if it wasn't Christopher Nolan, I would honestly forget this movie even existed. So that's my number 12. So getting into my number 11 is his first film, Following, which again has been a really long time since I've seen this movie. So I don't remember any of the specifics about it, but I do remember it being somewhat interesting. As I said, it was a bit thought-provoking. There were some twists, and it did go back, if I recall, it went back in linear time to parts that you've seen before in the movie and revealed other things that make you re-examine events that already happened. I do like that. I always love movies that do that, which is why I'm such a Nolan fan. And this movie is ranked at number 11, not because it was such a low-budget film, because apparently it was made for like $10,000, which is, wow, very, very extreme. To say it's low-budget is the understatement. And it's basically, Nolan described it as basically him and his friends getting together and hanging out and making a movie. But that's not why I have it so low. Most people bring that up, the fact that it's, so low budget and, a bit awkward, not edited the best or acted the best because of this. But for me, I focus more on the story aspect of it. Like, if the story is great, then I would be able to overlook those things. And granted, the story was good enough for me to put it above Insomnia, but I do, even though I don't remember exactly what happens at the end, I do recall it being, kind of interesting, but at the other way, kind of not completely tracking and being like, oh, that's a bit silly. So that's my number 11, Following. So next, are you ready to have your feathers ruffled? Here's the time I'm gonna ruffle those feathers. My number 10, The Dark Knight. Please don't send me death threats. It's just my opinion. I've not been a huge fan of this film. Again, I gotta put the disclaimer. You really gotta apologize up front to those fans of this film of what I'm about to say, but I think this is Christopher Nolan's most pretentious film that he's did. I think it drags on for too long, particularly the ending with, the two fairies and, which one's going to explode first. I was already checked out. In fact, I mentioned this before on my channel, that this is one of the few movies I saw in the movie theater that I wanted to walk out on. And I didn't walk out on it because I saw the film with like a group of like 8 other people, and I was sitting in the middle of them, and I would have to wait for them anyways. So I might as well just sit there and watch the rest of the film. And the moment I nearly walked out on it was when the Joker burned the money. Like, he didn't give a shit about the money. Now, most people I mentioned this to are like, oh, but it shows he didn't really care about the money. He's just doing it for the fun. And he likes, the cat and mouse game between him and Batman. I think that's dumb. Like, I'm sorry. I think it's pretentious. Like, I think that he can do both. He can want the money, and he can want to the cat and mouse game with Batman. The fact that he, becomes this crime lord, and we spend all this time in the movie with him defeating all these other crime lords and becoming the main crime lord, and all he does is just burn the money. To me, I felt like my time was wasted. And again, it felt pretentious. And then you have lines like at the end of the film where, God, what does he say? Something like, he's the hero. He's not the hero Gotham wants. He's the hero they deserve, or some bullshit like that. It's a very pretentious line, in my opinion. Even though I probably misquoted it. It's still, I'm sorry. I'm very sorry. Don't send me death threats. But I just never liked this film. And it's funny because there's a particular other film that which will be much, much higher on my list that most people throw out, and this really annoyed me. They throw out the only reason why you like this film is because you're a Nolan fanboy and you love The Dark Knight. In fact, I was arguing with this person about that other movie, and they started bringing up The Dark Knight and how pretentious this was, and I was like, I agree! I totally agree with you! I completely 100% agree that The Dark Knight is pretentious. It has nothing to do with why I love that other movie, which everyone assumed, oh, you only love this other movie because you're a Dark Knight or Nolan fanboy, which has always pissed me off because I don't even like The Dark Knight. But anyway, let me get into my number 9, which is Tenet. This is one that's not going to ruffle so many feathers. Maybe even having it as high as number. Well, it's going to ruffle feathers that I have it higher than Dark Knight, but everything is from now on, so that's a given. But especially this one. So Tenet was interesting. It was an interesting action movie. It had a sci-fi conceit that was really interesting. I was kind of engaged in this film, and I do want to. I haven't seen this since I saw it in the theaters, which was in the middle of the pandemic. I remember wearing my mask and being in a theater where there was only one other person who was sitting on the absolute other side of the theater as I was. But it's been since then since I've seen it, and I would like to see it again, because there are some really great action sequences. It's great the way they play with time, how some are moving backwards and forwards. But a common complaint about this film is that it's too confusing. I think it holds. Because, don't get me wrong, a lot of people say some of Nolan's other films are confusing, which I don't think they are. And maybe I could see that they kind of are, but I love that about it. I love the complexity, which is why I love Christopher Nolan. I love films that are complex and unique and different and make you think and you want to go back and watch it multiple times. But this one, it was just, for me, it overdid it. It was too confusing, and maybe it wasn't as thought-provoking. It was complex, to be sure, but not as thought-provoking and more just straight-up confusing. But more than that, and this is something the pitch meetings point out, the fact that this film is like a series of the protagonist who was never named. Again, kind of pretentious. He just meets a person, talks to him, and they spat out exposition. And he meets another person, talks to him, spat out exposition. And he meets another person, talks to him, and they spat out exposition over loud music, by the way, and you can barely hear what they're saying for this exposition. And I didn't really like that. I thought, the person who first tells him about Tenet at the start of the film, we never see him again. Then we see this female scientist, and then we see Michael Caine, and then we see this Indian arms dealer, and they just is always a different person, and I didn't like that. I had no connection to the character, and the fact that I didn't really feel the emotional bond. You're supposed to feel the emotional bond between the protagonist and his friend, but I never really did, because I felt like none of these characters were fleshed out. I did think the ending was clever, and I did kind of was emotionally attached to the main female protagonist in this film, who I don't remember her name. But other than that, I just think it's... I was very disappointed, considering how much I love Christopher Nolan. So next, I guess we're up to my number 8, which is Dark Knight Rises. Again, people will tar and feather me that I have this higher than the Dark Knight. But you know what? Dark Knight Rises is a silly comic book movie, and I kind of appreciate that. I'm glad that they don't try to be pretentious and make it something more and be meaningful. I'm glad that they just said, this is a silly comic book movie, so that's exactly what you get, and that's what we got. And so a lot of the plot holes that people love to complain about this film, I actually am fine with it. Like, how those police live in the sewers for a month? How did Bruce Wayne get from, where was he? Somewhere in Asia to all the way back to Gotham when, when he was broke and had no money and was like in the middle of the desert or something. And there's a lot of plot holes like that, and I don't care because it's a silly comic book movie, and at least it admits that it's a silly comic book movie. But I don't think it's the best movie. As I said, it is just a normal comic book movie in my opinion, and it's kind of generic in that regards. I do love doing the Bane voice going, that's fun. But anyway, other than that, yeah, this movie is kind of average. Okay, so next, we will get into my number 7, which is Batman Begins. So yes, it is my favorite of the Dark Knight trilogy. There are some silly comic bookisms in this as well, but again, I'm okay with that. This is definitely better than Dark Knight Rises because it has like the character stories I can attach to a bit more. I think the conflict between Bruce Wayne and Liam Neeson's character was very interesting, done very well. And I think it's interesting portraying Bruce Wayne as this angry, angsty teenager who eventually becomes Batman, unlike the newest Batman movie, The Batman, where he just remains an angsty teenager, and I didn't buy that. I'm sorry, Robert Pattinson's easily the worst Batman. I will be on record for that. But anyway, I like the journey he goes through and how he learns to become this fighter with this dark edge. And I do like lines like when the guy says swear to God, he says swear to me, although I never got over the Batman voice. That was kind of dumb. But and the Scarecrow was cool. Like, I thought that was an interesting villain, even though it was kind of just a side villain. I liked the way they did it. So yeah, I still stand by my statement. I wish Christopher Nolan never did the Dark Knight trilogy and stayed away from comic book films, but this was a decent one, so I really liked it. So next we'll get into my number 6, which is Oppenheimer. Just saw this, of course, obviously. It just came out. And I thought it was a really powerful film. I thought it was a really powerful story. And I think it really gets into the death of this character. It is basically a biopic, and it does get into the death of the regret he feels and the importance of what he did, and how and the implications of that we're still feeling the ramifications to this day of basically creating this weapon of mass destruction, and how what he initially did created this chain reaction of an arms race and even bigger, even better bombs, and now everyone's got nuclear weapons that are more powerful than what he created. And it kind of began with him, and I think the film does a good job of getting inside his mindset and creating it in the things that he was thinking at the time, like the arms race with the Nazis, and then how having second thoughts after Germany was defeated. However, Japan was still, fighting, and they were the military was insisting on this, weapon, and how he kind of justified it as feeling like it would end all wars, but knowing in sort of the back of his head that that's not actually what's going to happen, and how he lives with the regret afterwards. And it was a lot of things apparently taken from history. Like I like the scene where he sees Harry Truman, and Harry Truman is like, "Oh, get this, never let that crybaby in my sight before," which is something Harry Truman actually said. Like not to his face, like in the film, but he actually did say that, and so. It was very powerful in that regard. However, I will say I was a tad bit disappointed because I think out of all Nolan's films, again, they do play with linear time. However, I think this is actually one of the worst examples of them playing with linear time. Most films where he plays with linear time actually love it, and I think works very well. Even when some people complain about it, I disagree with them, which we'll get into in my next film. But with this one, I did kind of think it was unnecessary, and I did think it was actually a tad bit confusing the way they jumped around in time. But more to the point, the main issue I had with this film is that I think it was unfocused, and I think a lot of like Hollywood Oscar bait biopics are like this, where they're sort of more of like, oh, this is the life of what's his face or whoever the character is. And it gets a bit unfocused. And I think it was unfocused when it focused too much on the Red Scare of him being labeled a communist rather than the guilt that he was feeling over creating this bomb. Now, the two are, of course, these two ideas are not mutually exclusive and they are related, but I feel this focus was too much on one, swayed too much on the Red Scare thing, where I think the focus should have been more on the creation of this bomb. So, yeah, I really liked it. I don't think it's the masterpiece some people are calling it, but it's definitely a really good film. So, next we get into number 5 on my list, which is Dunkirk. I really, really like this film. Again, this is the one I was referring to where people complain about it's not in linear time. I actually fucking loved it. That's actually my favorite thing about this film is the structure of it, how the non-linear structure of it, how there's 3 different storylines, and they even tell you in the text. It took me a while to pick up on it, but once I get it, like one storyline's taking place over a couple weeks, one storyline's taking place over a couple days, another storyline's taking place over a couple hours, and yet you get them intercut with each other, so then time passes a lot quicker in one storyline and a lot slower in the other storyline. I actually love that. I actually love the way this all comes together. So yeah, I think this movie does tell does a really good job of telling the story of Dunkirk, of this hopeless situation where the British Army is trying to be evacuated and they're being surrounded on all sides, and civilians come together to try to help evacuate them. And you really feel that, and I think those 3 different timelines really give you really encompassing perspective of the different aspects of it and what it was like. And actually, another thing people complain about this film, I've heard them, is that they didn't connect with any of the characters. I don't know what they're talking about. I connected with the characters. I really, it didn't do that big character building, but you could still connect with them, and mainly through the horrors of what they were experiencing, especially when we dealt with that one soldier who was suffering from PTSD. I thought that was particularly powerful, and how he absolutely didn't want to go back. That was very powerful, and a lot of things about this movie are powerful, so I really liked it. So it's in my top 5. So now we'll get into my top 4, which is my 4 favorite films. This is why I love Christopher Nolan so much, why I think I'm such a huge fan of his. And yeah, so this is what I love most about it. So we'll get to my number 4, which is Inception. Love this film. Again, it's similar to the Tenet, where it's like a complex action film, but I think it's way better. That because it's not too confusing and it's not too complex, but and you do get to care about the characters and you do get to know them a bit better, particularly the main character played by Leonardo DiCaprio. You get his backstory on how he and his wife did this dream thing, and something went wrong and drove her insane. She didn't believe reality was actually reality and killed herself. Like that was very powerful, and delving into that backstory through the eyes of the character who was played by Elliot Page when he was younger, and that character sort of being the young, naive, whatever, being introduced into this world. So we're sort of introduced to this world through their eyes. I thought that was very, very powerful. Absolutely. And this had some of the most stunning, some of the most amazing action sequences, particularly with the music involved and the editing involved, that I've seen in any action film. I think the way it portrays dreams is a little bit unrealistic. It's not really dreamlike, but that doesn't really bother me because I just go with the conceit of the film that these are what dreams are like, and this is what the breaking into someone's head is like. And I think it sticks with those, so it's consistent within itself, so that's all that matters to me. And the fact that they play with, the ins and outs, and things aren't really what they appear to be. The mind-bendingness of it is something that I absolutely love. And I did think that the ending was very emotionally powerful. And even that little thing that was supposed to be ambiguous at the end, I know what happened. It's real. Anyway, we'll get to my number 3 on my list, my third favorite Christopher Nolan film, and that is Interstellar. Now, this is the film I was referring to where everyone assumed when I said I liked this film that I'm just like it because I'm a Nolan fanboy. In fact, they said that not to me, but to everyone. Oh, anyone who likes this film is just a Nolan fanboy. Really pissed me off, really irritated, especially when they said specifically it's because of The Dark Knight, which I don't even like. No, I like this movie on its own merits. I like it for, and as I hope I've proven so far in my list, just because Christopher Nolan made a film doesn't guarantee I'm going to love it. This film I did love for its own merits. And what we did when I first saw this film, I saw it in the theaters, which I really hope that to see it in the theaters again, because I'd watch it again on, big screen TV or whatever I have at home, but it's still not the same. Like that, it was probably the best theatrical experience I've ever had. I remember seeing it in the theaters, and when the credits started rolling, I was literally glued to my seat. I was so, awed by what I just saw. I literally could not move for 2 or 3 minutes. I was just catching my breath. I'm like, oh my God, did I just experience this? This was a true experience. Now, this is number 3 on my list, so I don't think it's a perfect film. I think there are flaws that people do, I think, get too caught up on, to be fair. It's just my humble opinion, but they exist. For one thing, the start of the film did drag on for too long, and that's something I really noticed on the rewatch. I almost want to fast forward through some of the bits at the beginning. And the fact that Matthew McConaughey doesn't seem to give a shit about his son, just cares about his daughter. That's a thing. And the ending. Getting to some spoilers about the ending. I don't hate the ending as much as some people. Some people really hated the ending. I didn't hate it. I just feel like it would have been better if it was more ambiguous. I think they held your hand too much. I speculated that this was the studio's doing, but particularly based off of Nolan's other filmography, doesn't seem the type to hold your hand and explain everything to you. But I could be wrong. but that's just my guess. And I feel like this would have been better if they didn't hold your hand, if it was left more ambiguous as to what was going on. I think I would have appreciated the ending better. But, and I don't want it to sound like I only like this or love this film for two scenes, but there are two scenes in this film which I think are the best two scenes ever put to film. That sometimes I go back, honestly, and just watch these two scenes over and over again. The first one was when they go to the water planet, and they see what they think are mountains in the background. It's like, those aren't mountains, those are waves. Like, I get chills just talking about that. That's such a good scene, and like the way it's filmed, the music around it, and it's just one of the most intense, suspenseful, engaging scenes that I've ever seen ever in any film ever. The other one is the docking scene, of course, and I love the music to this. Sometimes I just listen to the music to this one scene on repeat, and I've watched this scene multiple times again. And God, it gives me chills every time when, of course, what's his face, Dr. Mann, played by Matt Damon, explodes himself in the airlock, and the ship starts spinning out of control, and so he has to try to dock with it. And they say, it's impossible. Oh God, this is one of the best lines in motion pictures ever. When he says it's impossible, he's like, no, it's necessary. God, such a good line in the music. How they like try to spin the ship and dock. It's one of the most enthralling, intense scenes ever. And so yeah, those two scenes are mainly why I love this movie, but they're not the only reason. I think, like, for example, the scene where Matthew McConaughey comes back from the planet after the time dilation and his kids had grown up, and what he experienced was just like half hour or 1 hour, and on Earth it was like 20 years, and getting messages from his kids that were grown up and seeing him crying, like, that brings me to tears. Like, I think that's the singular best performance Matthew McConaughey ever gave, and I will fight anyone on that. I think that was really great. And other things are really good about it. Like, I love the little robots. I think they're cool. So yeah, I love this film. I do consider it one of my favorite movies of all time. So next, we will get into my number 2, which is The Prestige. Another film I've really always loved. Again, this is getting in sort of the mind twistiness of Christopher Nolan. And I will be getting to spoilers for the next two films again. But yeah, so the fact that these two characters, it's about two magicians who have a rivalry. And from that premise, I was like, oh, that sounds boring. But it was actually really good. And I just heard someone complain about this film saying, oh, both characters were despicable and you don't really relate to any of them. But that's what makes it so interesting. That's what makes it so good, is that neither one of them is really in the right, and they're both kind of despicable, and they both have their reasons and their emotions. And, I've heard some people say that the twist ending, again, spoilers coming, the twist ending having to do with Christian Bale's character being twins, I've heard some people say that was predictable and they saw that coming. I did not see that coming. Maybe I'm naive, but I thought that was actually pretty mind-blowing. And when of course, as I said before, my favorite films are the ones you can go back and rewatch and get something new. And I get something new out of this film every time I rewatch it. And just seeing the complexity of all the hints and everything that they dropped with there being two characters, and how one was in love with, his wife, but the other one was in love with Charlotte Johansson's character. And at first you thought, oh, well, he's cheating on his wife. But it's actually two different people and one loves. And sometimes he's forced to pretend to be his wife's husband, but it's not really him. It's his brother who's married to her, and so he has to pretend to love her. And she's like, sometimes you love me, sometimes you don't. And he's like, not today. Like, stuff like that was just so fucking good. But I goddamn love David Bowie as Nikola Tesla. This is easily, I think, David Bowie's best performance that he ever gave ever. You have Andy Serkis being his assistant, and the scenes with him and Hugh Jackman's character was so good. Now, another thing I've heard people complain about, which again I couldn't disagree with more, is the hard turn that the film turns into actual science fiction at the end, because it has actual, the device that Nikola Tesla creates is actually, science fiction magic. It's real magic, as they call in this film. But I don't care. Like, I don't feel like films need to be rigid with sticking and staying with one genre. It's like, this wasn't advertised as science fiction, yet they're having science fiction elements. So what? I'm willing, especially if it tells such a great story and goes in really interesting directions. I don't care. I'm perfectly happy with that. I think it's an amazing film. Really love it. So now, we will get into my number one favorite Christopher Nolan film, and it is still the first Christopher Nolan film that I ever saw. The second one that he made, Memento. This is, for those who are familiar with my channel may know, this is my second favorite movie of all time. If you can, if I can call my list definitive, behind 12 Monkeys, which is my favorite. I would consider this my second favorite movie of all time. I think for a while it was Donnie Darko, but I think Donnie Darko is 3 now, and this is 2. I love this movie. So, again, I'm going to get into spoilers, and if you haven't seen Memento, please don't spoil yourself. Go watch it. This is not a movie you want to have. You want to go in completely knowing nothing and to have the full experience. So I beg you, if you have not seen this, turn off this video now, because I will be going into full-on spoilers, because you really can't talk about this movie. I mean, you could, but you can't really get into this film without talking about full-on spoilers. So it's about... And it's funny, when I first heard the premise of this film, because a friend recommended this to me because knew that I would love it. Described the premise as someone who has no long-term memory, who loses his long-term memory and only has short-term memory, loses his long-term memory every couple minutes. And I first saw that movie Clean Slate with Dana Carvey that came out in the early 90s, which is a silly comedy. I was like, it's like Clean Slate. But it's not obvious. I mean, it's the same premise, actually, but they've taken a much more serious, much more dark direction. They do such an amazing job. And when I did see this film, I was not prepared for the non-linear style of this film, where it's basically being told backwards. Now, there's two stories. Like I always say, and Christopher Nolan had this whole diagram of it, and the way he does put together is actually fucking brilliant. But there's two storylines. One's going chronologically forward, and the other's going chronologically backwards. The one's going forward is the black and white scene, and the one's going backwards is the color scene. But the one that's going backwards is the main storyline of the film. The one that's going forward is basically there for exposition to explain the premise and the background of the film. But these two things are intercut, and the background, the exposition scenes that are in black and white are going forward, whereas the main thrust of the story is going backwards. That is, you should know this because, as I said, I'm getting the spoilers. But that is that each scene that's being shown is the one that preceded the scene before it. And actually, it's actually brilliant because of the main character is someone who has no short-term memory. It puts you in his mindset because he doesn't know what happened before and you don't know what happened before. However, the difference is the further along we get, the more the picture gets. And what I think is so fucking brilliant about this film is that the main character, played by Guy Pearce, is the protagonist. Throughout this film, he's shown as the protagonist. He's the character. It's shown from his perspective. He's the character you identify with, the character you're rooting for. But then when we get to the end of the film, which chronologically happened before the events we already saw, you realize that he's actually the villain. In fact, again, this is another example where none of the characters are actually good people. They are all doing bad things, and they all have ill intentions to varying degrees or another. You actually find out that the Lenny is the worst. And he doesn't even realize this, which makes it even more powerful, that he is purposely misleading himself because he has no long-term memory. He's purposely setting up things for his future self that are lies. That's because the truth, the reality, that he actually killed his wife with insulin because she didn't want to believe he actually had no short-term or no long-term memory. And he's denying himself that instead of creating this fiction that his wife's killer is still out there and just making up clues for whoever it is that he wants to kill, and that there was someone who was manipulating him into killing people. When he found out about that, he then manipulated himself into killing that person. And it really, and there's also like bonus material that Jonathan Nolan, I believe, wrote some short stories that actually had to do with the time that takes place before this film, when he was in the mental institution, and what that was like, and that he was constantly trying to lie to himself and writing all over the walls, and eventually broke out of it. And I don't think I ever read those short stories before, but I heard about it. It's really fascinating. It's really interesting, the psychology of this character. It's one of the most complex films. It's another film I can watch multiple times and get something new out of it every time. And it's just in awe. I think it is a masterpiece. It is purely a masterpiece. Like, this is what I think what all film making or films should aspire to be. Like, something that this is so intricate, so like wonderfully thought out, and it comes together like beautifully, perfectly, and tells a very entertaining, thought-provoking, complex, emotional story that, I'll say thought-provoking again, and it makes you question everything that you knew, and spins it all in its head in such a beautiful way. So yeah, this is my favorite Christopher Nolan film. This is one of my favorite films of all time. So that is it for my ranking of all Christopher Nolan films. And if you did stick to this video to the end, thank you so much for watching. Feel free to leave your own rankings of Christopher Nolan films in the comment section, and be sure to check out my channel as I cover a lot of Star Trek videos and videos on many other shows as well. So be sure to subscribe so you can keep up with all of that, and thanks a lot for watching.